All right, so what we have, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to talk about constraints now, okay? And the best thing I can tell you about constraints, there's two things I told you guys to write down. The first thing is whenever we're given a point that's not on the unit circle, that we always want to create a triangle, right? Draw that triangle. The next thing is you need to make sure that you need to make sure from 4.3 you know your sine, cosine, tangents, and all that stuff. You got to know everything we learned from that. The next thing I want you guys to write down, and this is a very basic kind of chart, is something that we talked about when we're dealing with coordinate points in the quadrants. And these are our different quadrants. These are what quadrant points, the value or the sign of your quadrant points. Or, coordinate points, depending on what quadrant they're in. Right? In quadrant 1, my x and my y coordinate are both positive. In quadrant 2, my x coordinate is now negative, but my y coordinate is always positive. In quadrant 3, both the x and the y are negative. In quadrant 4, my x is positive, but my y is negative. Right? Hopefully you guys remember this from back in the day. Also how to label all the quadrants. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, what I'm going to do is, so the whole thing really in this section is we're going to do kind of what we did in 4.3. We're going to find out our new triangle. But then what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about constraints. So I'm going to put constraints on you, or on the triangles. So if you guys look at this, we need to figure out what constraints are being happening. So when I say sine is greater than 0, when thinking about the unit circle, what did the sign represent again, Mika? What did the sign represent? Sign represented what coordinate? On the unit circle, right? Remember when you were looking into the unit circle, we said the sign represented which coordinate? The y, exactly. So it says the sine of theta, which we can say represents the y coordinate, is greater than 0. So that means it has to be positive, right? It can't be negative. So what quadrants, Trevor, is the y coordinate greater than 0? Or positive, you could say. The y coordinate's positive. 1 and 2, right? Does that make sense right there? Then it takes a look at the cosine. So if sine was the y coordinate, cosine, Matilda, was the x coordinate. And it says the x coordinate has to be greater than 0. So what quadrants is the x coordinate greater than 0? So when is my x coordinate? What quadrants is my x quadrant greater than 0? Oh, sorry. Yeah, continue. 3 and 4. So which one was the only one that met both of those constraints? Not 3 and 4. Hold on. The y cosine. Yeah, so it would have been 1 and 4. So 1 and 4, they're both positive. And for the sine, it was 1 and 2, they're both positive. So the only constraint, the absolute quadrant that satisfies both of those was quadrant 1. Make sense? That's how you deal with the constraints. All right? So now that we've dealt with constraints,